All right, I'm going to take two more questions. One, two.
Mr. President, I still want to get back to your original words that he cannot remain in power. Can you help us understand, you have more foreign policy experience than any president who has ever held this office. Whether those are your personal feelings or your feelings as president, do you understand why people would believe you, as someone commanding one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, saying someone cannot remain in power is a statement of U.S. policy? And also, are you concerned about propaganda use of those remarks by the Russians?
No and no.
Tell me why. You have so much experience. You are the leader of this country.
Because it's ridiculous. Nobody believes we're going to take down. I was talking about taking down Putin. Nobody believes that.
Jake, we should note that the French president was one of several leaders who had expressed some concern about maybe this being viewed as escalatory.
Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know...
None of the three occurred.
None of the three occurred?
None of the three.
Mr. President?
You interpret the language that way. I was talking to the troops. We were talking about helping train the troops in...
Caitlin, President Biden suggested that no one could have interpreted his remarks as calling for regime change.
Of course, Jake, many people raised that question of whether or not that is what he was advocating for at the end of the speech. But today he says he is not walking back his statement that President Putin cannot remain in power. But Jake, he also says he is not stating a new policy from the United States government, which, of course, officials in recent weeks have said they do not support regime change in Russia. That is up to the Russian people to make that decision. And the United States does not have a position on that. But, of course, it came into question after those 9 words that President Biden said at the end of a very forceful speech.
What have I been talking about since this all began? I was expressing my outrage at the behavior of this man. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. And it's more an aspiration than anything. He shouldn't be in power. People like this shouldn't be ruling countries, but they do. The fact they do, but doesn't mean I can't express my outrage about it. Last question.
President, thank you. You've said that you're confident that your comment won't undermine diplomatic efforts. But just to be clear, are you confident that Vladimir Putin sees it that way, that he will not use this as an escalatory...
I don't care what he thinks. Look, here's the deal. He's going to do what he's going to do. Putin, look...
But you're not concerned that he may see your language and view that as a sign of a reason for escalation, use that as an excuse to escalate, given his recent behavior?
Given his recent behavior, you should, excuse me, I shouldn't say that to you. Given his recent behavior, people should understand that he is going to do what he thinks he should do, period. He's not affected by anybody else, including, unfortunately, apparently his own advisors. This is a guy who goes to the beat of his own drummer. And the idea that he is going to do something outrageous because I called him for what he was and what he's doing, I think is just not rational. Well, what was the second part?
Does it complicate the diplomacy of this moment?
No, I don't think it does. You know, the fact is that we're in a situation where what complicates the situation at the moment is the escalatory efforts of Putin to continue to engage in carnage, the kind of behavior that makes the whole world say, "My God, what is this man doing?" That's what complicates things a great deal, but I don't think it complicates it at all.
This was a problematic phrase. He had four problems he created for himself by misstatements. This was the biggest one, that Putin could not remain in power. There were 2 lesser ones, that the U.S. troops were going to be in Ukraine and that we were in the middle of a food crisis. But this is problematic, and it's having an effect on the president's polling numbers, because this is not the first time we've had a misstep on this. In the Fox polling, strong leader. Back in August of 2020, during the campaign, 47-47. After Afghanistan, 45-53. Today, 36-61. These kind of misstatements undermine the view of him as a strong and effective leader.
Compared to 2020, we're reducing the size of the deficit relative to our economy by almost 2/3, reducing inflationary pressures.
Sorry, can you say yes or no, Mr. President, whether or not you would be willing to meet with President Putin
It depends on what he wants to talk about.
Thank you.
last question.
What if he wanted to talk about negotiations? Now, what if he
Hello,
wanted to?
you said Supreme Court. Now, don't play that.
Well, you can't leave that hanging. Just real quick.
President Biden back in Washington late Sunday trying to walk back his ad-libbed remark a day earlier in Poland, where he appeared to call for regime change in Russia.
Mr. President, were you calling for regime change?
No. The provocative comment was off script and off message among the last words out of the president's mouth in a fiery speech.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House quickly sought to clarify, as did the Secretary of State.
We do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia or anywhere else for that matter. It's up to the Russian people.
Still, the off-the-cuff remark quickly ricocheted around the world, Putin's spokesman immediately firing back. That's not for Biden to decide. The president of Russia is elected by Russians, he said. The pushback among senior lawmakers here in the U.S. was equally swift. A top Republican slamming it as a horrendous gaffe.
On script, this administration has done everything they can to stop escalating. There's not a whole lot more you can do to escalate than to call for regime change.
It was the latest in a string of unscripted comments by President Biden that put him at odds with his administration's own messaging. Speaking to American troops, suggesting they could be headed to Ukraine, though the White House later reiterated the U.S. is not sending any troops there.
And on Friday, the headline of your column was, "The president should avoid public speaking, at least when the topic is important." And I printed that out to make sure I read it on Saturday morning. Saturday afternoon is when the ad lib happened, and I thought James Freeman was right.
Well, it's not fun being right in this situation, but thank you, because the consequences are so enormous. It sounds odd to say. I realize that to a lot of people this is going to seem bizarre to say that the president should not speak in public. They think of that's the job of the president, but it's really not. As we know, constitutionally, there's no obligation to do public speaking. There is a requirement once in a while to report to the Congress, but it doesn't have to be audible. So I think we've just seen this pattern of him going off script in ways that are really reckless and dangerous.
Mr. President, how does Come on, let's go.
I don't think it's obvious that regime change is not the U.S. policy when he says something like that. It was indisciplined. It was a speech where the world was watching, and Biden handed a gift to Russian propagandists. This is the U.S. versus Russia, and the U.S. wants to change the government. Now they had their statement that for them proves that, and then saying something also that you're not prepared to follow through with. So, you know, as Putin remains in power year after year from here on out, it becomes a way of undermining Biden's power. You said something that you didn't make happen. It was just sort of wishful thinking. So that's why I was disappointed in it.
At this point in the game, you've really got to keep your messages very simple and very direct. And I think this created some confusion that wasn't helpful.
Yes, I mean, President Macron has said as much. This has created, I think, more than confusion in terms of the tension that it has for people trying to negotiate with Putin.